Hi there, welcome to the last lecture of week 9. This is also the last lecture for our week on short fiction. I am sure you must have really found this week very riveting, because we learnt various elements of short fiction, various techniques used in short fiction. We understood what short fiction meant, its capabilities, and we also read some beautiful, remarkable short stories. I am sure you must have found them really very beautiful, and this is these experiences are rare to come by. Please remember, the stories that you have read are not ordinary stories, and after having read them, if you do not feel yourself slightly expanded, well, you would not have read them properly. So, you would have that is the reason why one of the short story writer says that after having read a short story, you find it difficult to come back because you will have expanded. Now coming back to your previous self, and it becomes slightly difficult. You face the problems of adjustment, something like that. So yeah, so you can read short fiction. Of course, we have already identified short fiction as concomitant with the rise of the middle class, the rise of industrialization, especially the rise of modernism and all that. And this is as a genre of literature that suits us better, because for poetry and fiction we need a lot of time, and for short fiction, well, we have some time at our disposal. Right, that's I mean, short fiction alone is also capable of redeeming us. Of course, it prepares the ground for us to be better readers of fiction, better readers of poetry. So no problem if you begin with short fiction. Now, based on our discussion of short fiction so far, and of course on our discussion of fiction too, can we conduct a very interesting quiz for you? Because I remember last time we conducted this quiz, I remember some of you enjoying it a lot, and you have always you have also conveyed to us that you learned lot many things, and we have also identified quiz as an extraordinary tool of pedagogy, because quiz does not merely elicit the spirit of competitiveness. By the very way it is structured, it is capable of aligning the learner in you into an altogether new dimension. Therefore, quizzes have always been an extraordinary pedagogical tools in the hands of educators, right? So let us quickly conduct a short quiz on this short fiction. Are you ready to this? All right. Yeah, this is not graded. Once again, this was we said this in the context of our first quiz as well. This quiz too is not graded, so you can as well relax and enjoy. Those of you who wish to be a little more proactive, you can keep a pen and a paper ready, and then as and when a question is displayed, you can what you can do, you can note down your answer. So again, we may not be able to give you a lot of time. Probably after each question about 20 seconds can be given, 20 to 30 seconds for you to figure out the answer and note it down. But in case you want a little more time, not to worry, you can always pause the video and figure out the answer, and then you can watch the video again. That you can always do. Okay, so here goes your first question. Should be an easier one for you, because we do not wish to begin in a very difficult way. Which is the ancient Indian collection of fables, which we said was originally written in Sanskrit and which has been translated widely across languages, not just within India, but throughout the globe. Can you identify this particular collection of stories originally written in Sanskrit and translated across many Indian languages and also into other world languages? If you want a clue here, this text is attributed to Vishnu Sharma, and like quiz, stories have also been very interesting and powerful pedagogical tools, and this particular collection demonstrated that to the world. In fact, if stories were formally employed as tools for education, this text demonstrated it way back about, let's say, 2500 years ago. So now can you think of it? Yeah, if your answer is Panchatantra, which all of you must have answered, you are absolutely correct. Here you get a complete mark. So, for your own convenience, let's assume all these questions carry 1 mark each. So, there are about 20 questions, let's see how many you score. As I said, nothing wrong if you don't score well, you will have learned them, right? And if you score better, that's absolutely brilliant. Okay. So, here comes your question number 2. Now, which of these features would you associate with short fiction exclusively? Of course, these features are a part of many genres of literature, many genres of fiction, short fiction and all that. If there is one feature that is exclusively associated with short fiction, which one would that be? You have as your options stream of consciousness, lyrical quality, love story and concise narrative. What is your answer? This sound quite familiar, right? Especially stream of consciousness. Can you recall in which class you learned this? Is it a feature or is it a technique? What is it actually? Well, here comes your answer. It's concise narrative. Of course, all of them are associated with all the qualities. Of course, a short fiction can equally be lyrical, whereas even a poem can be lyrical. Therefore, it's not exclusive. You can say stream of consciousness, that's more of technique, which can be featured in fiction as well as short fiction, therefore not very exclusive. And love story, well, love story, who can claim any kind of monopoly over love story? Everybody has an equal claim there. Concise narrative, it has to make use of a narrative and it has to be as brief as possible. Brevity is the soul of wit, all the more applicable for our short fiction, right? Concise narrative. Are you ready for the third question? Now, here is another MCQ. Which of these Indian texts deals with short fiction, or which is an example of short fiction? We have 4 options before you: Midnight's Children, the Mahabharata, the Jataka tales and the Ramayana. Well, if you want to exercise your 50-50 option, well, I'll remove the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Of course, you yourself know how to eliminate those 2, right? Now, between Midnight's Children and Jataka tales, well, you are an intelligent listener and a learner because tales are there. Could it be the correct answer? Well, your hunch is right. It's the Jataka tales. Remember, Jataka tales written again in 2nd century or 3rd century BC, written originally in Pali, that deal with various avatars of Buddha before becoming the Buddha, his life in the form of various animals, birds, human beings and all that. Jataka tales. So, right, they deal with Jataka tales, that's associated with short fiction, and you have no other close answer to that. Now, if we can identify the Western counterpart to the previous question, so which of these Western texts can be associated with short fiction? You have the Iliad, Merchant of Venice, the Wasteland, the Decameron. Well, the Merchant of Venice, you may not have heard me even taking out this particular name, right? Not so far in this class. Therefore, you want to eliminate that? Well, you can do that. You still have, you have heard of the Iliad and the Wasteland and even the Decameron too. Which one is it? Well, the Iliad we discussed in our origins of poetry class, and it's an epic, Greek epic. You know that. The Wasteland 2 is a modern epic written by T.S. Eliot. The Decameron, we discussed it in the context of the short story, a 14th century work associated with Giovanni Boccaccio, the Decameron. In fact, these are the pre-modern avatars of short fiction. We have already identified that short fiction in its contemporary form has its roots in the late 18th century and especially 19th century. Okay. So, if you want to trace the pre-modern avatars of short story or short fiction, the Decameron by Boccaccio and the Canterbury Tales written around the same time by Geoffrey Chaucer, you can identify some features of short fiction there, right? Okay, the Decameron. So, question number 5 for you. Who narrates most of the stories in the Tales of Arabian Nights? I am sure this is an easy answer for you, right? We discussed the Tales of Arabian Nights, 1001 Nights stories narrated there. Who is the protagonist? Who acts as a frame narrator? We identified Arabian Nights as having a frame narrative, and a frame narrative is where you have discussed that, right? We have discussed that while discussing techniques, which where you find a story within story, and sometimes a story within a story within a story within a story, something like this. A complex labyrinthine narrative strategy, which especially you can find in the Arabian Nights. So, who is the narrator here? Who is the lead narrator of stories? So, if I can give you this clue, she conquers her death by narrating these stories. Well, now you are right, Scheherazade. In fact, in order to postpone her death, because you know the story, right? The king, after marrying, the very next morning he wants to kill his wife. So now she finds out a way to stop this almost genocide of women. So she asks her father to forcibly, she convinces him to marry her off to this king, lunatic king, and every night she narrates a story to her sister, and the king overhears the story, and she stops the story at where the curiosity is peaked at its peak point, and she says if she survives the next morning, she would narrate the next part of the story the next night, and that's how she survives 1000 nights. And by then the king has grown fond of her, and now love blooms between them. So she just doesn't conquer death, she also conquers hatred, and love blooms between her husband and Scheherazade. Remarkable tale, Scheherazade. Okay, yeah. Now this could be slightly tricky for us. Of course, we have identified various types of short fiction, all right. Now this is taken from Ernest Hemingway. In fact, we discussed, it's to the credit of Ernest Hemingway, whether it is rightly or not so rightly, the shortest story ever written. You can remember that, right? For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn, and how on hearing that his listeners almost wept like anything. We discussed this short story right in the beginning of this week probably. So this excerpt is from his work. Mera lay still, his head on his arms, his face in the sand. He felt warm and sticky from the bleeding. Each time he felt the horn coming, sometimes the bull only bumped him with his head. If you can recall, the matador, the Spanish, the bullfighting context. So, do you think you can identify this particular type of short fiction here? In fact, it's even an excerpt from a longish book called In Our Time. So, if it's an independent excerpt from a longish work, we said it belongs to a particular type of short fiction. Can you recall this? Well, if you don't get the answer correctly, don't worry, but in case if any of you have got the answer correct, that means you've been a very perceptive listener. Something like I can give you 5 marks, though it is for 1 mark, I can almost give you 5 marks for this. So, the answer is vignette. We said the G here is silent. Vignettes, how vignettes offer very specific pictures, generally from excerpts from longer works, and they portray a verbal picture. It's a vignette. Okay. Yeah, if any of you have correctly answered this, you can almost count this answer for 5 marks. Okay. Yeah. Now, another question, identifying the short fiction type. We have identified several types of short fiction, right? If I remember, about 7 to 8 types of short fiction. Now, to which type of short fiction does this belong? Read it carefully. You can pause it and then read the entire thing once, twice until you are comfortable. Ravan is a 12-year-old boy who lives in the tiny village of Rin. He is small and rather scrawny for his age. His unkempt curly brown hair looks like a map on his tiny face, and his thinness makes him look like a walking skeleton. Look how very accurate descriptions. And it doesn't just end there. The people in the village poke fun of Ravan. The adults call him a weakling because he never stands up for himself. The children call him a coward because when confronted with the problem, Ravan always runs away. Ravan is the gentlest of the children in the village. He is the only child that can approach any of the farm animals without scaring away, because they trust his soothing touch and calming voice over the roughness and loudness of the other kids. Look how you may not be wrong if you have guessed it as an Indian work. You are definitely not wrong, or probably definitely not wrong, if I can use that term. Now, look how accurately the description is. So, now can you think of the type of fiction which focuses on accurate descriptions of the characters, accurate character descriptions? Right, it's a sketch, because like a sketch that you do using pencils, so here using words you sketch the characteristic trait of particular character here. So, this is especially very useful when during the character development. We said, right, if you want to develop your characters in a very solid and a robust way, so then probably you need to describe them as accurately as you can. So, as if when somebody reads it, they must be able to mentally visualize this guy that you are describing. So, a solid characterization helps a lot, and sketch is a type of fiction that exclusively focuses on characterizations. Sketch. Okay. Let us go to question number 8, another short type, short fiction type, and with that we will stop this kind of question. Final question from my end as far as identification of the type of short fiction. Okay. Yeah. 2 a.m. all is quiet. There is just me and the cat slinking around in the dark. I head up the street, sneaking between the poles of light until I reach my target, number 22. Hiding in the shadows of the door, I stop and listen. Perfect, no one is up. Carefully, I work on the lock, and soon the catch clicks open. Pause. Silence. I push the door wide and slip inside. Success! I take a moment to slip off my shoes. Well, until now, of course, it looks like a thief, but I don't think any thief after entering into the house so smoothly would remove the shoes, right? So, if somebody is removing the shoes, must be a part of the house, maybe sneaking around. Sneaking into the kitchen, I start by raiding the fridge. Brian! Yes, Mom. What time do you call this? Well, of course, he thinks he can slip past his mom. Of course, mom is mom always, she notices, and of course, all his efforts go vain. What kind of a narrative fiction is it? What type of fiction do you call this? I am giving you the answer right away. It's called a drabble. Now, we have identified, right, a drabble is one of the shortest varieties of fiction. It's a short story, So, less than 200 words, about 100 to 200 words, we said 100, right, something like that, about 100 to 200 words, not more than that. And look how it gives a complete picture, beautiful short story in itself. It's a Drabble. There are a lot of Drabble competitions. In case you are really good at that, you can as well try your hand there. Okay, yeah. Now let's move on to our question number 9. What do you call the vantage point from which a story is narrated, whether it's in fiction or in short fiction? Can you identify this element of fiction? It's also an element of short fiction. We have already identified this, right, whether the elements of fiction are also equally applicable for short fiction. So, now what do you call this? In fact, the clue is there in the question, the vantage point from which a story is narrated. Therefore, this is related to the narrative technique. If it is related to narrative technique, what could be the element? If your answer is something like perspective, you are right. The precise term to use here is point of view, because you describe a particular thing from the point of view of a character. So, there are various points of view in a novel, and how these various points of view also enrich our own understanding of something. This is a beauty of literature. We have identified this is to enhance our own understanding, to develop an appreciation for diversity and all that, perspective, rich perspectives. So, point of view is the correct answer. Yeah, we are approaching almost the 10th question. This is we have come to 50% probably. If time permits, we can take 10 more questions. Now, what do you call a succinct didactic story, whether it's in prose or verse, that illustrates one or more instructive lessons or principles and usually involves a divine presence? It's again, it's a question related to a type of fiction, that's the clue. Succinct, very brief, up to the point, didactic, moralizing. So, what do you call that kind of a story which emphasizes on the moralizing part? Did you say fable? Fable, is it? Right. Or wrong, I am sorry, this is a parable, right, because there is a distinction between a fable and a parable. Right. What is the distinction between a parable and a fable? A fable too makes use of stories like morals. Like a parable, you also have various characters, but in a parable, it's the characters are mostly human beings, and maybe there is a divine element. You don't make use of in a fable you make use of animals, birds and other things. So, that is a distinction. Otherwise, as far as moralizing part, short, succinct, all of them, these descriptions hold good, both for parable and fable. But where you have narrowly missed is, this the presence of characters. There in a fable, it's more, generally speaking, it's animals and birds, whereas in a parable, human beings. Of course, we discussed the parables of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and the parables associated with Jesus. All of them, right? It's a parable. Okay. Now, question number 11. This is probably the easiest question, because the answer is there in the picture. If you can clearly see, you should be able to get it, and we just discussed it just a while ago. What type of short fiction are these texts good examples of? So, these we have animal form, you have Panchatantra, Aesop's fables. Well, this is damn easy, right? Right, it's a fable. They are all examples of fable, but of course, there is a, when it comes to Panchatantra, it's a fable, out and out fable. When it comes to animal form, it's a fable, but more than that, it's a political fable. It's more like a political fable. Nevertheless, fable, right? Okay. Now, question number 12. This again should be easy if you have paid careful attention towards our discussion of plot, right? Remember, we came out with a beautiful pyramid structure and all that while discussing plot, a technique that most of the short stories and novels make use of inevitably. In fact, this is part and parcel of almost every work of fiction. So, a series of events in a short story that build up to the climax, what do you call that? Here, these are the series of events that build up to a point called climax. What do you call it? We have 4 options: resolution, climax, rising action, exposition. So, since climax is used in the question, well, a question cannot be that easy, right? Therefore, climax you can delete, right? So, between resolution, exposition, rising action, where do you get the doubt? Well, resolution may not be the one. Therefore, if your doubt is anything between exposition and rising action, you are definitely right. Now, between the two, which is it? Here comes the answer: rising action, because after exposition comes in the beginning of the pyramid, right? Exposition is where characters are introduced, setting is introduced, everything is properly, neatly introduced to the reader, and from there onwards, series of events, actions involving characters, they go on, taking the plot up and push the plot towards the point of climax. From there it's the falling action, and towards the end it's the resolution. Either there is a resolution or even a lack of resolution still, So, rising action, the answer to the question is rising action, because climax is a point from which there is a volte-face, there is a total turning, sometimes it can even be a 180-degree turn, something like that. So, for this the correct answer is rising action. Okay. How is it going so far? Out of 12, what's your score? Are you, do you feel comfortable going ahead? Let's quickly go through some more questions we have and see how many you get. Why did literary forms such as fables, parables, hymns and epics flourish in ancient and primitive human society? Of course, this point we have been discussing for last 4-5 weeks, right? Probably from 3rd week onwards we have been discussing this particular point. Why do you think? It's a descriptive, short descriptive answer. Can you identify the reason behind why literary forms such as fables, hymns, parables, epics and even ballads, you can call ballads, why do you think they flourished in ancient and primitive human society and not so much in modern society? Because by association you find novel, short story, modern poetry as present in the modern society. Why these particular forms, especially in the primitive society? Well, because all of them, remember, they are, you can trace them back to the oral storytelling traditions of our societies. When the printing press was not yet invented, when there was no means of writing it down, when language itself was at its nascent stage, when the system of writing itself was not yet invented, stories were circulated from mouth to mouth, right? So, that is the reason why they flourished predominantly in the oral storytelling traditions in the primitive societies, right? Yeah, good. Let us go ahead and discuss question number 14. Now, all short stories are a type of short fiction. Okay, this we discussed it, just a couple of classes ago probably. But all short fiction are not short stories. Is the statement correct? Now, it's an easy one. It's just a 50-50%, So, either you turn the wheel, you get the, you win the lottery, or you don't win the lottery. It's just a 50-50% chance. Is it a correct statement? We said short stories are a type of fiction, but short fiction is not short story. You can say a short story is a short fiction, but short fiction is not short story. Do you agree with it? Of course, you should agree with it, right? We have been discussing even during this quiz, we have been discussing that. That's a correct statement. That's absolutely an emphatic correct statement. Look how boldly, that tick mark is almost it's blaring, right? It's the correct answer. So easy for you, right? I am sure after a comparatively a difficult question you had this an easy one, just a yes or no question, all right? And yes is always better. Okay, yeah, for learning related things, not for something else. Yeah, question 15, a common thread that runs through the whole story and that it binds it together, what do you call that? Again, related to the element of fiction and short fiction. We have 4 options here. What do you call that kind of common thread that runs through the entire story? It may not be visible throughout, but it can be dormant. It can it is there, hidden, concealed, but you can feel its presence throughout. What is it? Could it be symbolism? Because I do not think symbolism, what is it? Symbolism, is it an element of fiction, or is it related more to the use of language? What is it? Symbolism, or is it conflict, point of view, themes? Well, how many questions can one ask about point of view, right? We have asked 1 or 2 there. So, do you think we still can ask a question on point of view where the point of view is the correct answer? You can leave it out, I can give you that clue. Symbolism too, you can leave it out. Now, between conflict and theme, conflict cannot be there. If the entire novel is about conflict, who reads it, right? The correct answer is theme, because theme is something that runs inherently across the entire spectrum of fiction, short fiction, short story, novel, everything, and it offers you the glimpse into the writer's precept of life, his or her understanding of life, or philosophy or vision, something like that. So, theme is the correct answer here. Okay. Very quickly, let us go to question number 16. Okay. Which of the elements deals with time and place when and where the story unfolds? This should be very, very easy, right? Again, you can find it. If in a story, which of these elements deals with where the story takes place, when the story takes place, which of these elements? Obviously, the moment it is when and where, it cannot be history, right? Because what about that fiction which happens in future? So, history, it is not even a suitable or a competing option, right? So, you can almost remove it. Again, point of view perspective is said, how many questions can one ask? We can as well do that. You are absolutely right if you have said setting is the answer, because setting is that very important element of fiction and short fiction where you get to know where the story unfolds, where the plot unfolds, when the plot unfolds and all that. It deals with the setting. Setting could be even a rainy season if the story takes place in a rainy season. You have a very interesting play, right, written in Hindi, Ek Ashad Ke Raat or something like that. Can you recall it? So, there the rainy season itself becomes the setting, or or if it happens in summer too, or if it happens in 1980s, 1990s, or if it happens in Mysore, if it happens in Dublin. So, all of them setting. Okay. Question number 17, of course, it is related to the story we discussed in the last class, right. In the story Kafka and the Travelling Doll, what do you think is the central theme? What do you think is the central theme here? Is it love disappears? Of course, the story talks of the disappearing of love, the girl's love for the doll. Death is a must. Oh my God, where is this option coming from? And definitely, death, what has it got to do with the class? Let us kick it out. Okay, travel. True, the doll travels, but that is not the main theme, right. So, between love disappears and loss and coping with it, love disappears, but it comes back. She gets the doll back, right. So, therefore, loss and coping with it. If you have reasoned in all these ways, of course, you have definitely learned how to reason well. This particular way of reasoning in logic is called ratiocination. Ratiocination is the way you deduct, leaving out not so applicable ones, then deducting your answer. When you do not know exactly which is the correct option, you leave out not this, not this, not this, and in Indian philosophy we call it the Neti method. In fact, while describing God, some schools of philosophy call God is not this, God is not this. Why do they do it? We do not know how to define God, right? Therefore, we can say, well, God cannot be cruel, God cannot be sadist, something like this. So, it is a Neti method. So, in logic it is called ratiocination. If this is how you, then you have learnt it perfectly, logic. Good. Let us quickly go through question number 18. Now, now look at this. This is an interesting animation, right? And this should be an intelligent bird. What are the 5 parts of the Freytag's pyramid one has to keep in mind when analyzing a fictional narrative? Well, if you do not answer it correctly, that means you are not attentive even in this class. We have answered this twice even in this class, and we have answered it a couple of times during our discussion of fiction and short fiction. The 5 parts of Freytag's pyramid, right? Remember, we said just a while ago, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action and resolution. Don't be bewildered by this French word, just of course to let you know this word, that is all we have used. Otherwise, you do not get an extra mark, or you do not lose a mark if you have identified it as resolution. Denouement, a French word, resolution. Okay. Question number 19, again, which of the following best describes the protagonist in fiction and short fiction? Again, we have identified different types of characters, right, and we have said protagonist. Who is a protagonist when we say? Remember, protagonist, antagonist, a supporting character and all that. Who is a protagonist? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he a hero who is in love? Is he a main character? Who is he? A bad guy could be. Not all the novels need to make use of a good guy as a hero. Or is it a good guy? Well, whether it is a bad guy or a good guy, a hero who falls in love, a hero who breaks out of love, the correct answer is the main character. A protagonist is the main character. Okay, it could be a hero, it could be a heroine. We do not use the term hero and heroine, lead character. You can say the lead character, and the opposite, the lead character is antagonist. You have protagonist and the antagonist. A conflict takes place between the two, and you find climax, resolution and all that. So, this is a clash between the protagonist and the antagonist. The correct answer for the protagonist is the lead character or the main character. Okay. The last question for this class, and with this let us see how well you have scored. Okay. Which of these is not a characteristic feature of short story? I have put not in a bold letter. Please pay attention to this. Many of you lose mark if you do not pay careful attention to this. So, except one, the rest of them are features, characteristic features of short story. Which one? Which is the odd one out? Narrates a single event or experience, written somewhere between 100 and 1500, 150, 100 words or 15,000 words, creates an impression on readers. It is a type of non-fiction. Which is it? This too should be easy, right? Again, we have been shouting this answer for quite many slides now. A short story is a type of short fiction, and therefore, you can't call it a non-fiction, right. So, this is again an easy one. The correct answer is it is a type of non-fiction, that does not belong. So, the rest of them are the characteristic traits, all right. Okay. Now that we have completed this quiz, is there anybody who has scored more than 15 out of 20, including the 5 extra marks we gave? Anybody at all? That means well, you have been listening to these classes very, very carefully. You are the darling of all the teachers, And those of you who have not been able to score so very well, nothing to worry. Of course, the classes are mainly for you, right? Because a teacher focuses more on those students who don't know but who wish to learn. Well, these classes are for you, and please don't lose your heart if you haven't scored. Well, now if you take this quiz again, I'm sure you will take 20 out of 20 or even 25. Well, I am not saying it in any negative sense. That means you have learned the answers, right? You have learned 20 questions and now you know the answers to all the 20 of them. All right, good. Thank you very much. I really hope you enjoyed this quiz and also this entire week, our discussion of short fiction, short stories, brilliant, remarkable short stories that we read. Please continue reading short stories, and next week we come up with another form of literature. Right? Until then, take care. Bye-bye.